take a chill pill for a second, and I'm gonna go and see if we're live.
So we might be live. Should we try and be entertaining just in case?
Just our faces are entertaining enough.
I'm wearing
Quick,
a
Amber,
gingerbread
tell a
outfit,
joke.
you guys.
Tell a
Look
joke.
at how cute.
So
Let me see.
cute.
Yeah.
Gingerbread
That's what I
outfit.
got. That's what I got for entertainment. Uh,
Or
I
let's
bought.
pick up this drink. It says, I don't know if you can read it. It says manifest that shit on the glass.
Oh, I love that. Yes.
There you go. You can see it backwards.
Well, this actually is a manifestation because Greg and I talked about doing a live together about a year ago. It's probably like roughly a year to date. So it's pretty exciting that it's actually happening. And I feel like we're manifesting the magic today for sure.
For
So
sure.
so we're in three different countries. Jamie's in Arizona, Amber's in Mexico, Greg's in Bali.
Indonesia. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. It's working. We're live. So I'm gonna take myself away.
Bless you. All right.
Thank you.
We ready?
And give it like 2 more minutes and start in like 2 minutes. Let's just do that. Bloop.
Everybody's like, do, 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 do.
Right. I think we should give it a minute and hit it on 5 after.
Okay, that sounds great. See if we have some humans that join us for this event. Well, I guess, can we see, is Artem going to capture questions?
Yeah, so he's going to capture questions in the chat, and then I got WhatsApp next to me, so I'm just going to read them off for you to answer.
Cool, amazing.
That's
fun.
the idea. We'll see how it goes, though.
Awesome.
All right. It's 5 after. Are you ready to rock and roll? Greg, you ready? Amber, you ready? All right. For those of you who are joining us live, thank you for coming to our first live interview for Normalized Psychedelics. We really wanted to start connecting people who have been healed to the community. We really wanted to create a space for people to come and ask questions in real time for people who have healed in very special ways. My name is Jamie Blaskus. I'm co-founder of the Normalized Psychedelics Project. Our goal is to release 1,000 healing interviews to change the narrative around psychedelic medicine. Today, joining us is Amber. She was heavily medicated on pharmaceutical mental health drugs for 22 years. Fueled by her frustration, she embarked on a healing journey that resulted in real healing. Eventually, she was strong enough to detox off of her drug cocktail. I call it the death cocktail. And she is living mental free with all these meds now. And she's a radiant healer, loves her life, and lives every day with presence and joy. So thank you, Amber, for joining us. We also have Dr. Greg Lizella, a veteran and functional medicine doctor that helped Amber with the last piece of the puzzle. And we're going to talk more into that and how he came about diagnosing and really her mover forward. Amber, could you introduce yourself and anything that I may have missed?
Yeah. Where shall I even start? You really nailed it, right? Like, I think that the big part of my story is that I have this transformational journey where I went from a place of living in deep suffering, in affliction. I was put on psych drugs when I was young, at 12 years old, and spent 22 years believing that I was profoundly broken and that those substances could somehow fix me. And it was after my second suicide attempt in my 30s where I was like, hey, I don't think that these drugs are working. And I began exploring holistic techniques. And I'm somebody who now practices a lot of what I call energy work practices, meditation, breath work, chanting mantras, yoga, dance, movement, art, like ways that we can express ourselves and feel safely and move energy through our bodies and train our brains to be healthy and well and be able to deal with big emotions. Like I'm somebody who didn't learn how to regulate my own emotions. And so I thought that I needed a drug, a pill, to calm me down, when the truth is that that actually caused a lot of other problems. And when I was able to finally detox off all of those drugs, it seemed for a while like I was okay, like it was better, and I was so grateful to get to live as my full self. But then I began having mystery illness. And it was 5 years of me being like, I don't know what's wrong, but something is very wrong, and my situation getting progressively worse and worse before I met Greg. And at that point, I was really on my knees praying to the divine, like knowing something was very wrong. And Greg and I became very dear friends, and he was like, this is not normal, Amber. And we were able to find a diagnosis for autoimmune disease. And so I'm sure that we'll dig in quite a bit more on all of these parts and pieces. But once we had that diagnosis, then launched an entire new healing journey where he was holding my hand, guiding me, and we were able to do so much with sleep, diet, and exercise. But we got to like the 9-month mark. And you know, the problem is that I have a brain injury. Those drugs, being on psychiatric drugs for 22 years and doing a too fast, unsafe withdrawal, caused a traumatic brain injury. And so I ended up doing 2 sessions recently with ibogaine, which is a sacred root from Africa. Well, iboga is the sacred root from Africa. Ibogaine is the active substance in iboga. And I did 2 sessions working with that psychedelic, and it has been just a miracle, quantum leap to my healing, because it has incredible brain healing properties. And so I'm really excited tonight to talk about things like mental health and psychiatric drugs and the difference between that and psychedelics and autoimmune disease. And I think that there's so many themes in this story that we can dive into and unpack.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And I completely agree with you, Amber. Like, there's a lot of people going through what you went through currently or in the past or somewhere along your journey. And I feel like this death cocktail with a lot of these psych meds, you know, combined with like Ambien because you're not able to sleep and you know, a lot of things like that, and it becomes very unhealthy. And so I feel like there's going to be people seeing that, so they're going to be on different paths, like whether they're fully loaded, they're still taking them all, or they're trying to get off them, or they're off them and they're detoxing, and they need a direction to go. So Dr. Greg, can you just kind of give us a little insight from a medical standpoint of like what Amber experienced from then until now and the steps she took, and even maybe some advice of like how she could have made it easier on herself up until the diagnosis?
Great. Well, very happy to be part of this conversation. And I first want to start with the kind of general medical consensus right now when it comes to antidepressant withdrawals. And interestingly, within the past year, there have been a few very landmark and groundbreaking articles published in very reputable journals that have finally kind of galvanized and brought light to this silent epidemic that's happening all around us all the time. And the very unoriginal diagnosis is called antidepressant discontinuation syndrome. And, you know, basically, I want to talk about 2 articles in particular. One came out from the Journal of Addictive Behavior. And basically, they looked at over 1,000 participants and gave them questionnaires. And as Amber will hopefully discuss later on, but there's a huge database of growing information in these peer review groups. In other words, a lot of people are very sick right now, and they're coming together and saying, "Hey, what's going on? I'm having all these random crazy symptoms. Oh, you're having that too?" And basically, they kind of tapped into this database, and basically it showed that over 80% of people that had withdrawal symptoms had them for over 2 years, and of and they were severe and debilitating, which is pretty scary, honestly. And interestingly, they didn't really ask any questions pertaining to metabolic issues. So they were only looking at neurological things. The other study I want to point out came out from the Lancet, which is one of the most kind of esteemed psychiatric journals around, and they published a meta-analysis. And basically, a meta-analysis looks at everything that's been published for and say, okay, what kind of patterns can we pick up from all this material? And how can we synthesize and break it down? And basically, this showed that 1 in 3 people that have taken antidepressants will experience withdrawal symptoms. This is staggering. So there's currently millions of people that are on antidepressants. And if you just put the math together, that's a lot of people walking around with these, quote, mystery illnesses, right? And how does this pertain to Amber? So basically, Amber came in and she presented with, well, she was having these chronic viral infections come up almost every month. She's having dizziness, brain fog, these kind of alternating patterns of bloating. She's having vertigo. She'd collapse after trying to exercise. And, interestingly, a lot of these actually correlate with what's been published in these studies. So, in other words, common symptoms of the withdrawal syndrome, same things: dizziness, palpitations, weird coordination issues, anxiety, cramps, and so on. And yeah, so those are 2 articles that have been published that are groundbreaking, and it overlaps with what Amber came in to see me with. And I can continue.
My question is, honestly, because what you diagnosed her with and what you healed it blew my mind. Autoimmune in the cerebellum. Can you go into detail? Because I never in a million years would have gone there.
Sure. Yeah. So, my job is really to be an investigator and to put all these different parts and pieces from a person's history and their symptoms together and say, hey, what's really happening underneath the symptoms? What are the underlying mechanisms that are actually driving this, and how does it fit into a diagnosis? And unfortunately, a lot of people within the conventional medical system are just so specialized that they're not seeing the whole picture. And even within the kind of holistic integrated medicine world, very few people are actually looking at how the brain impacts metabolic function, and metabolic function impacts the brain. And so basically, we sat down and looked through her history. I looked through every region in her brain and symptoms corresponding to those parts of the brain. And she had very severe symptoms pertaining to a part of the cerebellum called the vestibulocerebellum, and say, okay, this is really interesting. Now let's actually correlate this with some physical exam findings. And sure enough, she had what's called ataxia. In other words, she has a really hard time, or had a hard time, positioning herself in space. Uh, she also had something called dysdiadokinesia. So, in other words, you can do this by yourself actually. So, moving the hands like this and then straight, and you'll see that one side is significantly slower than the other. And it's a very classic cerebellar finding. When we tested her reflexes, there's something called pendulum reflex. So, in other words, let's say you tap the knee, and usually the reflex goes out and it comes back and it stops. But with Amber, well, it just kept going. And that's another kind of sign for cerebellar, because the cerebellar helps to basically act as a braking mechanism for that motion. And the last thing was with her HRV, so you just do a pulse ox, right? Clip that to the finger. You can see the heart rate actually jumping all over the place for her. And without going too much into detail, but it's a very complex sort of mechanism and pattern. She was having these cerebellar issues, and the cerebellum acts as I was saying, one of the main kind of braking mechanisms for the part of our brain that controls fight or flight and rest and digest, the autonomic centers. And of course, if that braking mechanism isn't working properly, of course she's going to be having symptoms of anxiety and palpitations, and you're going to see this heart rate jumping all over the place because, well, that part of the brain actually isn't working properly. And of course, that's going to be driving metabolic issues, right? So a lot of our gut functions are involuntary, and if when our brains are working properly, we're in rest and digest, right? And we eat something and it moves through and everything is fine. But if that part of the brain, of course, isn't functioning, then forget about trying to digest our food properly. And the last thing is, so we ran through the history, we ran through the exams, and the last kind of final step was actually running a panel that showed, of course, elevated antibodies to her cerebellum. And that was boom, 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 the kind of final step that we needed to correctly diagnose the cerebellar autoimmunity.
Excellent. Thank you so much for explaining all that. And so, Amber, I want to go back to you. So you use like yoga and all these like natural ways to get you off the medicine. You were still struggling. You met Dr. Greg. He diagnosed the cerebellum. How long between the diagnosis of the cerebellum to the ibogaine experience was that timeline?
Well, first, I want to just say, like Dr. Greg just explained all of that as in a very, smart clinical way. But the way that that felt to me was like I was going to fall off my legs. Like I got so dizzy walking down the street that I started getting seasick. I like literally I was like car sick just trying to walk. And I started making jokes that it was like trying to do life on a tilt-a-whirl. Because I was definitely trying to have a sense of humor about it. What I will say too is I think that we villainize illness and consider it all bad, but there were so many things that I discovered during that episode of being incredibly unwell. And like I've begun to think of them as like the cave years, where I was trapped in this darkness of not knowing what was going on. But there are gems in the cave. There are things to discover. Like you don't spend 5 years in a cave and not come out with treasure. And when I met Dr. Greg, like it was pretty critical. And when he gave me this diagnosis, I was like, oh my God, if that had gotten worse, I could have lost the ability to walk and talk. Like the cerebellum is how you move. And when I got that diagnosis and he was like, "Yeah, you're losing your motor movements, your functions." It was like, "Okay, this isn't just like a baby problem." And I work with a company called the Inner Compass Initiative. They have this incredible website full of all sorts of resources for people who are working through withdrawal, considering psych drug detox, and we'll definitely link to it in the notes afterwards. But they have a community of people who also have been through this journey. And, you know, Dr. Greg was just talking about antidepressants, but like I was on benzos for 22 years. I took a benzo tranquilizer for 18 years daily, and those work directly on the cerebellum. And I was an alcoholic. Alcohol also works directly on the cerebellum. Think about a person who's drunk. They're just all, they can't use their body. Like that's what was happening to me. I was like drunk all the time, basically. Well, not like really drunk, just, you know, tipsy, but not cute tipsy. um, so, I mean, very interesting experience. I personally believe that part of the reason I got so ill is because when you take these drugs, and I would love for Dr. Greg to give his perspective on this. When you take these drugs, they reduce your brain function. There was this story that I got when I was younger that was like part of the mainstream medical narrative in the 80s and 90s when like psych drugs were an all-time high, that the drugs were correcting a chemical imbalance. Turns out that is a lie invented by a Prozac marketing executive that like got adopted by medical schools. And that's what I was told. I had many doctors say to me, "Oh, Amber, it's like you need to take serotonin because you're deficient in this substance and blah, blah, blah." That's not true. That's not true at all. Now we know that they cause a chemical imbalance and they reduce brain function. And so all of that time that I was medicated, my brain could not properly work and was reduced in function. And our bodies are so sweet. They are trying so hard for us to always be returning to homeostasis. And so my body, in its attempt to create balance, was really limited. And I really believe that part of that illness was a purge of all of the unfelt emotions, the unprocessed feelings, all of the things that I was tapping down with assisted disassociation, because I really believe that that is an accurate description of these drugs, right? And so then, I mean, my physical body had to come back online. I had to do physical adjustments, but my emotional world, I had to purge and process all of that stuff. And while I was in these interesting cave years, I did a lot of crying. I had a lot of anger. I had a lot of stuff that I had to work through, and I had to learn new ways of being, which is where we can like come back maybe to that yoga connection point. But I'm wondering if maybe before we do that, Dr. Greg could talk a little bit about how these psych drugs work.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So this is really interesting. Before I really go into it, I want to talk about two major publications, 2018 and also 2022. And basically, they looked at everything published on psych meds in the 2018 paper. And they wanted to say, look, is this stuff actually effective? Is it working for people the way that it is purported to work? And basically, they found that no, as you were saying, Amber, absolutely not. It doesn't fit into the narrative. And moreover, there's kind of been systematic cover up in terms of not reporting studies and things that showed just the opposite. So in other words, the whole field is a mess. And they did, so they released this, it ruffled a lot of feathers within the psychiatric community and the medical world. And you would think that, okay, there's been some changes, right? And they did a follow up in 2022, expecting, okay, there's been some, maybe they've implemented some positive measures, they're helping to clean this up. And unfortunately, that was not the case, and nothing really changed. So, in terms of the way that psychiatric medicines, let's say, have benefits, so usually people will take them and then kind of go on this, let's say, honeymoon period for maybe about a month. Of course, there's other symptoms associated with that, feeling detached, disconnected, etc. But they've actually proposed that the main way they work is through an anti-inflammatory impact. Um, and basically, after approximately a month, um, you're not really seeing this sort of effect on the brain anymore. And unfortunately, long-term use, just like any other drug that you take for long term, um, it's going to have a major impact in terms of how the receptors, dopamine receptors, serotonin receptors, if you're on benzos, the GABA receptors are actually firing and wiring on a daily basis and really make significant changes for the worse.
I just want to go back to something you said, because I just want to reiterate this for the listeners, because it's really shocking, because I didn't know this myself, that these psych meds are really anti-inflammatories. And if you bring the inflammation down in the brain, of course it's going to be clear. Of course you're going to think better. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh my God. Wow.
You know, we've worked a ton on my brain inflammation, actually. There's a lot of natural things that we could do to reduce brain inflammation. I don't know if that's something we want to talk about, but there are so many other options.
That's incredible.
Well,
I mean, do you want to do like maybe some bullet points just for people? Because that just blew my mind, because it's like, I never knew that. We're really working with inflammation here. We're not working with like the dopamine receptors and things like that.
yeah, no. And so just to be very clear, studies have, it's not a conclusive thing that the psych meds are anti-inflammatory. There's some evidence that indicates this. But again, this is a very short-term thing. And then when you take them over the long term, they have just the opposite effect. And they actually become neuroinflammatory.
Interesting. Amber, do you have anything to add to that?
I will say that I seemed to be getting worse and worse as time went on, right? Like my chaos and crazy went into just continued spiraling downward the more heavily medicated that I was. And like I mentioned, I had 2 suicide attempts. Like I got to a very, very low place where I was just in the depths of despair and totally hopeless. And like, I just felt like there was no reason to even be alive anymore. And the way that I was doing life was so chaotic, and I was in a place where I was just fighting with humans, with my work, with relationships. Like there was no flow and ease and joy in my life. And I definitely think that those substances created a scenario where I just didn't have access to my full self. And what has been really beautiful is that as I've gone through this journey, I've gotten to know Amber. Like I've gotten to reclaim who I am and my essence. And I've discovered that I'm not somebody who needs to get medicated away. Like I'm worth having around, you know? I have a vivacity and spirit that is really I have like a guide, right? I have a voice, an internal guidance system, a higher self. And as I've been able to get in touch with that part of myself, my soul, my being, I don't need all of that outside assistance. And, I coach people now. And one of the things that I see that's super important on a journey to freeing your mind from these drugs is realizing that you have all of the medicine and the power and the wisdom and the strength that you need inside of you already. You don't need a pill to fix you. You are not broken. These pills are not a solution. They're like Band-Aids that temporarily alleviate some of the symptoms, but only you can pull off those Band-Aids and really look at that wound and know what you need to heal it from a deep root cause place. And so my journey has involved a lot of like deep subconscious work, going in and discovering like, okay, well, how did I get to be such a crazy person? What kind of programming do I have inside of this subconscious? Oh my goodness, right? And going from a place of looking at my darkness as just shameful to seeing that these things that are actually so difficult and scary are the treasure. Because if I can discover what it is that is so dysfunctional about me, then I have an opportunity to approach that with love and purge it, integrate it, or transmute it. And there is an opportunity when we go in and face these problems full on, as opposed to trying to put Band-Aid solutions and disassociate away from them, because then they're always chasing us. They're always behind the Band-Aid, behind us. But if we go in, all in, then there's real opportunity. And as I've gone on this journey, it's been a lot of deep soul work, right? But also, I've had to learn to listen to my body. I've had to create an entirely new relationship with this physical vessel. When we are born, we get a body. Oh my God, I got a body. Like, how cool is this? Seriously. Have you thought about how freaking cool your body is? It wakes up with you every morning and does everything that you ask it to. It's trying so hard to help you. Your body freaking loves you. And all of these illnesses, these diseases, this discomfort, this suffering, it's messages. It's my system trying to create an alert and say, hey, something is wrong. And so am I going to keep ignoring it? Am I going to take some more pills so that I don't have to deal with that? And that message that like, hey, right, has to get so loud that I'm extremely ill? Or can I get to a place where I am in communion with my body, dancing with this physical vessel and listening to her, because she is insanely wise. She holds my energy, she holds my emotions, she can guide me if I'm able and willing to tune in. And so this illness has helped me create a level of attunement to my physical state that ultimately is resulting in a lot more flow and joy in my life, far more than I ever dreamt was possible 20 years ago while heavily medicated on all of those drugs.
That's awesome. Ember, thank you so much for sharing. Well, we are normalized psychedelics, so we're definitely going to be talking about psychedelics, and I'm really curious how your 2 flood doses of ibogaine really help move you forward in your healing, Amber, as well as getting, after, you're done sharing, getting Greg's point of view on how that works with the cerebellum or how that works within the brain.
Yeah. Well, I think you asked me earlier how long it had been. I'm trying to remember the last question that I didn't answer well. You asked me how long it was between the diagnosis and the ibogaine, right?
Yeah, but we went on a good tangent. It was great.
Well, it was about 9 months, I would say. And I mean, it's funny how things happen. As I dance with more grace in life. The universe speaks to you in just these signs and synchronicities. And ibogaine really came into my field. Like, I had things that happened where I randomly watched a documentary about a woman who did an ibogaine session, and then I met some amazing humans. Christy from Casa Well was the person who guided me on my session. And then Dr. Greg was like, Amber, you should do this. And actually, I think that maybe we should have Dr. Greg explain it first, because he's going to do a better job than me.
Thank you, Ember. So first of all, you have to understand that when it comes to healing the brain, there are there's no real home runs. And what I mean by that is there's no magical supplement or formula or thing that you can take that is gonna like immediately just heal the brain and everything's gonna be peachy dory. It doesn't work like that. And the really interesting thing about iboga is that the molecule is extremely complex, just from a molecular standpoint. And this allows it to actually work on many different pathways in the brain, in the body, and gives it this kind of jack of all trades sort of function, which is fascinating. And of course, you have to realize that anytime a pharma company tries to make a synthetic version of anything natural, you know that there's something really, really good there. And when it comes to uh, the way that iboga impacts the brain and how it pertains to amber, there's a few things. So first of all, there are these cells in the brain called glial cells. Everyone talks about neurons, right? Um, but actually, your brain has way more glial cells than neurons. And glial cells, if you look at them, they look like little Pac-Mans. And they're always just going around and they're kind of munching on debris and things and happy. And this really helps to make sure that all of the pathways between the cells can fire properly. It clears out any kind of inflammatory stuff that's happening, and they just make sure everything works the way it's supposed to. Specifically with dopamine and serotonin in those pathways. And the problem is that when we have, let's say, a TBI or concussion, long-term psych meds, etc., basically these little Pac-Man, they lose their arms, and then they become kind of overglorified couch potatoes. And this actually creates more inflammation in the brain, and it's a vicious cycle that happens. And so when you actually look at healing the brain, there's two things. First is called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. And the second thing is called GDNF, glial cell-derived neurotropic factor. So you have to elevate these substances in the brain actually for the brain to start recovering and to get more of these healthy glial cells into the mix, right? And there's definitely diet, nutrition, lifestyle interventions you can do. Specifically, for example, like high intensity exercise. But the thing is, in terms of how much this is actually going to be elevated in the brain, and if the person actually has the capacity to do long hit workouts, right? And in Amber's case, no. I mean, she was crashing after even a walk down the road. And basically, when you look at iboga and ibogaine, this exponentially drives up the number in the amount of GDNF in the brain. It's one of the main reasons why it's so effective. And um, secondly, just to kind of think about this metaphorically, um, when it comes to, let's say you have a party in the brain, and dopamine is the guy that's the center and the life, right? Um, and the problem is that the brain always kind of works to keep its or try to keep itself in balance. But if we create too much dopamine over the long term, um, the brain starts to produce other things that will help to modulate this, to calm it down. And the fascinating thing about the ibogaine is that basically you're increasing dopamine and serotonin levels, which are, of course, chronically depressed in people that take antidepressants. And, this we already talked about the fallacy of the narrative, but it simultaneously depresses some of the things in the brain that kind of help to act as the brakes. So in other words, you have more dopamine and serotonin to work with to give you that motivation, to give you the focus, to give you the drive to go through this very rigorous and intense experience. And at the same time, it blocks the part of your brain that's usually activated that makes a person go into check out, numb out, space out mode. Uh, Specifically through the dynorphins that activate something called the core pathway. So again, I know there's a lot of physiology, but basically it's going to allow you to really focus and be with your shadows and all the stuff that's coming up. And it's also going to prevent you from checking out when the stuff comes up, which is the usual response, right? And the last thing I want to talk about, I know again, it's quite a lot. You have these pharmacochaperones. Well, it's in effect actually. And basically, these help to restore misfolded proteins. In other words, everything is composed of a protein in terms of the cells in the body. And the problem is that the proteins in these different receptor pathways, with psych drugs, with the GABA, the benzos, they become damaged through the long term. They don't function as efficiently as they should. And the ibogaine helps to actually, through this effect, restore them to proper health and thereby ensures that the pathways start working again, and also helps to create new pathways in that process.
Thank you for explaining that. I feel like it's important for people to understand like what it is on a scientific level, because you're going to have Amber talk next about what she experienced on her end, but I feel like some people have a hard time wrapping their heads around all that without the science behind it and the explanation of what biologically goes on in the mind.
Cool. Thank you. Hopefully it wasn't too much.
No, I mean, I'll be honest, like a lot of those went over my head, but we'll watch it again and I'll get it. Amber, would you like to share your side of it, your end of it?
Yeah. One of the things I learned when I was doing some research about ibogaine and iboga is it causes ataxia. And we just talked about ataxia. And when I heard that, I was like, whoa, that's what I have. And when I had the experience, it felt like the ibogaine kind of took my body so that it could do this deep healing work. And there was this one vision that I had that was in the middle of the night where I saw this pyramid open up and there were just all these like numbers going through the sky. It was like it was completely recalculating things when I was on my journey. So what's really fun, I'm thinking I could talk for 5 years about this experience because it's a long experience. Like I've done a lot of different psychedelics at this point in my journey, and the ibogaine was a it's a big deal. Like I got a doctor examination, a physical examination beforehand. They checked my heart to make sure that it would be, you know, it would be kind for my system, that I was a great candidate for this work. And then the first session that I did a flood dose, and you you I don't want to like make this sound too serious because everyone's experience is different. But my experience was that I was like paralyzed. I could not move, which is ataxia. And Christy describes it as you get really, really, really relaxed. And some people that might last for a little while, it might last for a long time. I think because I already had ataxia, my ability to move was greatly affected for quite a few days. And so I had the first session, and then I had a couple days where I was coming back, and then I went into a second session that was like 70% of the dose. And as I was going in, that experience, like there's a lot of psychedelics where the physical part at the beginning of the journey is difficult. Like for example, ayahuasca, people purge a lot. And sometimes in iboga or ibogaine, one of the reasons that ibogaine is used instead of iboga for the big flood doses is because there is less nausea, there's less throwing up, things like that. That tends to happen more with the iboga. I didn't have nausea and I didn't throw up, but I did get really dizzy. And it was interesting because that was my problem already. I was kind of afraid of this dizziness, and I had this like crazy, awful circus clown, like a demented circus clown voice in my head that was like, "This isn't okay. You're not okay." And it was really a bit disturbing for a piece of that time because I had to face what I had gone in to work on, basically. And there was kind of a peak moment where I'd been having this dizziness and been trying to resist it, and I just had to let go and surrender. And I remember laying in the bed and just watching, being like, it was like everything was spinning, and I couldn't do anything about it. And I finally let go and was like, well, that's what's happening, and I guess it's okay. I have to give up. And the next thing, I don't know if I fell asleep or what happened, but there was like a black, just silence, like totally peaceful moment. And I took the medicine at probably 10 a.m. and this was probably around 4 or 5 p.m. because when I opened my eyes, like the sun was going down. So many hours later, and I realized I was doing this, I was blowing bubbles. And I was like, oh my God, I'm blowing bubbles. What's happening? And I heard like the voices in my head. It's like, you're a baby. She's a baby. She's a baby. Oh my God, I'm a baby. And then this sort of demented circus clowns turned into rainbow marching bands. And you know, my brain is pretty fantastical. Like that is not the way that everybody's subconscious is going to create visions and dreams, but you go into a dream state, like you are dreaming. And so I was in this like REM dreamland, and I was blowing bubbles. The only part of my body I could move was my mouth. And at that point, like it was kind of difficult for me to surrender to arrive there. But then I was the most relaxed and calm I had ever been, that I have ever been in my entire life. It was so peaceful. And I kept seeing like water, and I was just like, I'm a baby. And I remember opening my eyes as a baby and having this experience of seeing my mother for the very first time and being like, oh, she's the most beautiful woman in the world. And I had a lot of like mother themes. I probably can't tell you every one of my stories, but there were some really sweet childhood memories that came back for me. But I also had a lot of memories because I specifically went in with the intention of working on my physical health, of the abuse that I have done to my body. You know, I'm somebody who, when I started out, I was anorexic at 12 years old. That's what landed me in the doctor's office. That's why I got put on psych drugs. Then I became bulimic. Then I was an alcoholic. Like, I saw myself at those years where I would drink bottles of wine on the couch and then make myself throw up so that I could go to work the next morning. Like, I really abused my body. I used to sit and hide in my closet, and I would scratch the back of my neck until it bled and I had flesh under my fingertips. I took bottles of pills trying to kill myself. Like, no wonder my body decided to attack itself. Like, she got the message. You don't like me. Okay, I'm here to help. I'll attack me too. And seeing that, like, I definitely had a moment where I was weeping and feeling all of that, you know, darkness. And then I had these opportunities to reprogram and change. And I'm really grateful that I've been on this path and doing work for quite a few years now. And I was able to recognize, like, hey, this is my big opportunity. I'm clearing some of this stuff out. So I'm gonna tell you just like one of my visions, because I mean, I took the medicine at like 10 a.m. and I was probably having visions for at least 24 hours. And then for the next 24 hours after that, it was like in and out of visions. The amount of information that came through to me was just astronomical. And then, I mean, I had a second journey too. So like, it was like a week of my life where I was just like, so much information. And the first journey that I did was more about purging for me. And then the second journey that I did was a lot more about reprogramming. And I was able to do some great work there and really see how the work that I've done has become my own medicine, and that I've claimed that. But for example, in the first journey, I was looking at something in the corner. I was like, ew, what is that? What is that? Oh my God, is that pubic hair? And I like get close to this thing, and it's like, I like pull it out, and it turns into this giant ball of like flesh with pubic hair and like dismembered arms and legs hanging off of it. It was like the grossest thing that my imagination could come up with. And I was like, what is that? And I was like, oh my God, it's fat and ugly. And I mean, that was my story when I was a teenager. You're disgusting, Amber. You're fat and ugly. You don't deserve to be alive. You're a giant failure. You're blah, 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 blah. And there it was in my subconscious. Big ball of fat and ugly. And I was like, whoa, what do I do with this? And I had these memories, you know, I opened my eyes and saw my mother and was like, she's the most beautiful woman in the world. But my mother also said that she was fat and ugly. Like, I got fat and ugly training. And it was difficult to see her disliking herself so much. And it's like I saw all of these memories connect, you know, to where I got those opinions and beliefs deep, deep, deep down within my soul. But then I was there, and it was the moment to let it go. And so I asked the Ibogaine. It was really sweet because I almost felt like I had this dialogue with the medicine, with the Ibogaine, where I could be like, okay, I'm ready to see whatever, or I'm ready to work on this thing, like, what do I do? And it's like, pick a friend. Well, okay. So I went and got my neighbor, who is this really cool dude who like drives a motorcycle and wears leather pants, and sometimes he'll do man stuff for me. Like, he's fixed my toilet before and he changes my gas tank. And I was like, he can handle the fat and ugly ball. And so I got my neighbor to help me, and we literally pushed fat and ugly, just rolled that giant ball into the galactic center. For me, the galactic center is representative of like returning something to source, because the galactic center is a real place where galaxies birth and die, and our galaxy is actually an arm of the galactic center. And so I love like the concept of returning something to source. And so as my journey went on and I came up and I found these like very disturbing things in my subconscious, I threw them in the galactic center and was like, I'm done with that. I see how I got there, I accept it. And then in the second journey that I did, where I was doing more reprogramming work, I found a lot of limiting beliefs. Like, there were some memories that I had where it was very clearly about fear. And I began working with the texture of fear. And I began realizing that I didn't feel secure in so many places in my life. And examining that, well, why don't I feel secure? Why am I afraid? And I realized that in my experience, and it was like I would ask the Ibogaine, and it would just bring me these memory medleys where all of these visions would come back to me, all of these things that happened. And I was like, it's because when I was young and technically things were secure, I was miserable and trapped. And then later on, I grew up, and for a while, I was married. And when I was married, I felt miserable and trapped. And then there were other places in my life where I felt miserable and trapped. And I realized I had a limiting belief in my subconscious that being secure and being safe means I am miserable and trapped. I was like, well, no wonder I am having so many practical problems and moving all over the world and have some financial issues and like, okay, I see it. Thank you very much, Ibogaine. But then I had an opportunity to like, okay, we're not going to throw fear into the galactic center. It is just too foundationally human. I can throw that limiting belief into the galactic center. And I did. In that journey, I was working with a spirit team. I had a spirit team that I amassed of friends. And my friend Haley helped me throw the limiting beliefs into the galactic center. And my dear friend Uzi was being my brain surgeon. And so he helped me open up my brain. And we got in there. And we reprogrammed that to security is freedom. And I have an entire memory medley of moments and places in my time, in my life, where I have proof of security, having resources, and a solid home, money, things like that, where that has offered me a lot of freedom. It's allowed me to travel. It's allowed me to grow. It's allowed me to birth and bloom and offer things to the world. And so that's really exciting, and I got to do all of that work in the journey. And since that time, as I'm coming back to real life, shall we say, regular conscious state, I have been being very conscious to try and only reinforce the beliefs and the mindset that I am consciously choosing to cultivate now. And so I keep reminding myself of that. Security is freedom. And anything that goes against that, like I'm not feeding those beliefs that I identified as harmful anymore. And coming back, my health has been so great. Like, we got to a place where I was doing pretty well. Like, I was reasonably functional, but I would go to the gym and feel really crappy the next day and kind of collapse and just like struggling to have consistent energy and still having some infections and just not in the dream state quite yet. And since I've done the Ibogaine, like, honestly, my health has been so great. I feel like it has returned a vivacity, a life force, just this nectar that is my essence. It's like before, I was always sort of scraping the bottom of the cup, like, oh, I think I have enough, I can do it. And now it feels like my cup is just overflowing. And that's a much better way to live.
Thank you for sharing, Amber. And you know, I just want to clarify for the people who are listening the difference between iboga and ibogaine and how it was explained to me. And Greg, please correct me if I'm wrong. Iboga, we're going to compare it to like coffee. Like, iboga is the coffee bean, and ibogaine would be like a caffeine pill. It's just like a part of it. So would that be a good analogy?
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Okay, so I just want to be clear. Dr. Greg, do you have anything to add about what Amber just said?
No,
No.
it's just been so incredible to see Amber's transformation and to kind of come to a plateau with her recovery and to see how Ibogaine has really taken it to the next level. And when it comes to any long-term substance abuse, uh, whether that's alcohol, opiates, or even psych drugs, um, you know, ibogaine can really be a potentially completely transformational option for people. And, it always comes as part of a full package, right? And you also have to make sure that you're really supporting yourself on the other domains of life in terms of lifestyle, diet, nutrition, before and afterwards in order to have the greatest impact.
Jamie?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you because it's always, a concern of mine that as, psychedelics do get decriminalized and then become legalized and we're all, creating these frameworks around it, it's not just the psychedelic that's the catalyst. It's the integration around it that is vital for improving your health. And that's what I really like Amber's stories is she had the pillars there. Like she was doing meditation and yoga and she was doing all these things already. Amber, can you just speak on how that really helped with your ibogaine experience, the foundation that you'd built with Dr. Greg?
Oh my gosh. All of the tools that I brought in with me were extremely helpful. Like, for example, I chant mantras and I have relationships with gods and goddesses that I have been working with, these archetypal energies and using these chants for years. I mean, I started chanting mantras in like 2018. And so I had those energies come to me in my journey. And then I had the opportunity to continue working with them afterwards. And so the things that you bring in 100% form your toolkit for what you're working with during that experience. And, one thing I would love to touch on, I always worry that people are going to be like, oh my God, look at this girl. She took psych drugs for all these years, and now she's just over here taking psychedelics, like one set of substances for the other, right? But the big difference, at least how I see it, is psych drugs are consciousness reducing substances. They actually make you less you. And psychedelics are consciousness expanding substances. A woman like myself, I really had a lot of work to do when I got to the point that I was ready to face it. And these psychedelics have been extremely helpful for me to get in there, get into my subconscious and do this work because they reveal things that I have a hard time seeing in a regular waking state. And it's really helped me create this wasn't my first experience. I've done mushrooms and that's helped me connect to my heart and my internal guidance system. And I've done ayahuasca and that's helped me connect to the cosmos and the guides and the plant spirits. And I have these connections with the spirit world that were really, really amazing going in to this, this container. One thing that happened recently, I spoke at this conference, the Psychedelics conference here in Mexico City. And actually, Artem, Normalized Psychedelics, you guys were there. I saw this beautiful contrast where there were so many scientists and just these smart people on the stage giving practical information. And then there were also the shamans and the healers, and people had come from the desert and from the woods, from the forest. And there's this marrying that's happening right now of this ancient wisdom that has existed for so long. I mean, these plants predate us. Shamanism, ancient cultures have been using plant medicine and psychedelics and have been talking to the earth, to the spirits since before we have records. And just now, we have finally gotten sick enough that we're maybe there's something to that. And now there's all this cool science coming out about it. But when I looked at the humans on that stage, there was a presence that those shamans, the medicine women, the Wirakuti, there was this vibration that they emitted, that there is no amount of smart intelligence that can top that. It's just like, wow. And I feel like in my regular waking day-to-day life, I go outside every morning and I put my feet in the grass and I meditate in my garden. And I swear to you that the earth is teaching me as much as I learn in any class online. And so for me, there's a back to the roots feeling here where I'm like reclaiming my body, reclaiming my sovereignty, reclaiming what it is to be a human. And as a human, a being of this earth, it's my birthright to get to connect to the medicine available to humanity, to what Pachamama is offering us. And I think that we should take advantage of it.
I totally agree. I couldn't agree more, especially when it comes to like indigenous and ancient cultures. Like it's like the old new is coming back, and it's because like science is proving it, that it's like now we can move forward. But it's like a knowing that we know what it's for and how it helps. Dr. Greg, is there anything you would like to add to that? No? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. We've been going for over an hour. This has been great. For those out there that really want to connect with the two of you, I know, Amber, you are the Mental Health Rebel. That's your Instagram handle. If people want to connect with you, reach out to you, learn from you, how can they find you?
Yeah, Mental Health Rebels. I have mentalhealthrebels.com. There's the website. You can also find me on social media. I do a lot of Instagram posting, but I also exist on TikTok and YouTube. And I offer one-on-one coaching. I help people discover mental freedom for themselves and unshackle their minds from all of those limiting beliefs, the dysfunctional programming, things like psych drugs. I'm just really passionate about people getting to live fully themselves, completely aligned in the way that I believe is our birthright as humans, to get to be mentally free, 100% holistic. And I teach a lot of energy work practices, things like yoga, breath work, chanting mantras, meditation, and really encourage people to find the modalities that work for them, because that presence helps us do life with so much more joy and ease. And beyond coaching, I also do astrology readings, which are really, really fun. I am obsessed with the cosmos, and there's so much information that we can discover in our birth charts that helps us orient towards our mission and purpose. And so whenever I do a reading with someone, we uncover a lot of opportunity. So those are two different ways that people can work with me, and I have so many exciting projects coming, so please follow me. And I am always delighted when people write me messages and connect with me, and yes, I would love to continue expanding my network.
Love it. And Dr. Greg, if people are like, I got this condition that, you know, because Amber was saying like 30 doctors went with her and no one could figure it out. I know that there's a lot of more people out there just like Amber. So if people want to reach out to have you help them, where can they find you?
Usually Instagram is the best place at Dr. Greg Global.
And are you on Facebook or just Instagram?
Mostly just Instagram.
Perfect. Is there any last minute things that you would like to add? Anything coming through from either one of you that you would just like to add before we wrap this up? Amber? I know you got some juice coming.
Well, I'm just really excited for this opportunity. I am such a huge fan of what you guys are doing with normalized psychedelics. You know, our stories are our medicine. Like, I lived this big, wild, crazy story. What am I gonna do with it? Like, I can have a poor me, like, how sad. I mean, I was put on psych drugs when I was 12 and it ruined my life, and now I have autoimmune disease, right? But we have an opportunity to transmute our stories into the most powerful medicine there is. And I just want to say to people, if you're in a place where you're really struggling, like, that could turn out to be a beautiful opportunity if you so choose to make it one. We have a lot of agency and power, and I think that sometimes the suffering is the call. We're suffering because our soul is saying to us, there is another way. There is more. You can be more. You can do more. I know it's true. And I'm so excited for anyone that is listening today. If there's any part of this that awakens remembrance or joy or magic or medicine in you, then I feel complete.
Thank you for that. And I just want to add, our big motto here at Normalized Psychedelics is you are not alone. There's a lot of people out there struggling with stuff that you're struggling and have overcome it that would love to help. And so thank you two so much. One question here. Oh, one last thing. If you want to submit your story to Normalized Psychedelics, please go to our website and fill out a form there, because we are going to be continuing these, I think, either bi-weekly or once a month, depending on the intake that comes in. So if you are interested on being this live channel and sharing your story like Amber and Greg, please go to our website. There's a portal there. You can fill it out, submit your stories, and we will reach out to you. Amber and Greg, thank you so much for joining us today. I think time is the biggest resource that we can give to one another, and so it's just been a blessing having you, and I so deeply, very grateful, filled with gratitude for being the first to get this rocking and rolling on our YouTube channel. All right, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, and hopefully we'll see you guys back here again.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Greg.
Bye.
Thank you.